Limbo is a puzzle platformer developed by Playdead and originally released for the Xbox 360 back in 2010. The game takes cues from the cinematic platformer genre which flourished in the 90s, but with more modern control characteristics and mixing in some of the dramatic death sequences popular at the time. And of course, the game's visual style is in a league of its own, being strictly two-dimensional but looking more like an old film than a sprite or vector-based video game. The combination of these elements made Limbo a smashing success in the summer of 2010. It would go on to be the third best-selling Xbox Live Arcade title that year, selling over 500,000 units. After being released on the PC and the PlayStation 3, sales eclipsed 3 million. In addition to being a commercial success, Limbo was a critical darling. Joystick scored the game a perfect 5 stars, stating, "Dark, disturbing, yet eerily beautiful, Limbo is a world that deserves to be explored." Destructoid gave the game a perfect 10 out of 10, noting, "Limbo is as close to perfect at what it does as a game can get. It's artistic without being pompous, difficult without being cheap, and violent without being gratuitous. It gets everything just right." Finally, The Escapist scored the game a perfect 5 stars, proclaiming, "Limbo pulls off the nearly unthinkable by taking a well-worn genre as the 2D puzzle platformer and turning it into something surprising and fresh. Equal parts brains and beauty, it boasts both cleverly constructed challenges and a gorgeously distinctive look." So, is Limbo still this good, or is it all style and no substance? Let's dive in. Limbo doesn't have much of a story. Uncertain of his sister's fate, a boy enters Limbo. That's it. This isn't even found within the game. Instead, the game opens with a black and white scene. Upon pressing a button, 2 eyes will light up, the boy will wake up, and eventually stand. In typical platforming style, running right will allow forward progress. Speaking of typical platforming style, Limbo features incredibly simple controls. In addition to moving left and right, the player can jump, push objects, as well as pull them. The boy can also climb ropes and ladders, but these don't require any special button presses. The controls are tight and responsive as well. Mid-air adjustments are permitted, allowing the player to reduce speed to land on a platform. If one jumps from a standstill, however, no inertia can be gained. This isn't a knock at the game though, just an observation. Anyway, using the limited moveset, Limbo then becomes an obstacle course to the finish line. Similar to those cinematic platformers from the 90s, the structure of the adventure is loose. There are no defined levels, for example, and there aren't even load times, just a trek from the opening forest to the end credits without interruption. However, that isn't to say it's just one long level either. First, the opening forest world differs greatly from the metropolitan segments found in the middle of the adventure, and finally the industrial elements near the end. I also feel like the game has a certain flow to it, with each puzzle feeling like a new beat or de facto level, intentional or not. Speaking of puzzles, these are the crux of Limbo. From beginning to end are a series of obstacles a player must overcome. These are not simple platforming challenges either, rather the player must use thought and reason to overcome a situation. Early on, this is simply pulling a crate and then using it as a platform. Later, this might be using the game's physics engine to solve a puzzle. Timing elements are also added, not through a timer per se, but an event happening, like rising water, forcing the player to move quickly. Limbo is generally a challenging game to play the first time. Between quick reactions and complex puzzles, deaths are bound to happen. Thankfully, when they do, the player is placed at the beginning of the puzzle, never having to repeat previously conquered obstacles to progress. Moving along, I should talk about the graphics, as this is generally considered the title's defining feature. As one can no doubt see, the game is presented in black and white, with no color to speak of. In addition to the 2D landscapes, one will no doubt notice various graphical effects were used to give the game a film-like quality, and it looks like it was shot on an old camera. As the camera follows the action into light and dark areas, the camera will often lag behind when searching for the appropriate light balance. This happens with the focus as well, with background and foreground elements occasionally blurring and sharpening. Also aiding in the overall aged appearance is a softness or vignette around the edges of the screen and plenty of film grain. Limbo also looks like it is being projected with old equipment. First, the game runs at 30 frames per second instead of 60, helping it feel more like a piece of film than modern digital video. It's certainly possible this was a limitation of the game engine, but it does feel like a deliberate choice. There is also a sort of slight flicker, like one would see on an old analog projector. Between the subtle camera techniques as well as the projection effects, Limbo's looks like it was drawn in the silent era of the 1920s. The sound also deserves special mention. There really isn't music in the traditional sense, although certain machines and set pieces offer a sort of rhythm that is musical. However, most of the sound consists of a sort of hissing, scratching, white noise, intermixed with the environmental sounds. The protagonist's feet make a satisfying crunching sound on the forest floor. Flies buzz, saws screech, and boulders crash. It's all done convincingly as well, doing a great job helping Limbo feel like a real place, despite the unique aesthetic and decidedly unrealistic set pieces. But of course, smooth controls, unique visuals, and excellent sound are not enough to make Limbo a great game. Now, there are two main elements I want to explore further here. First, the actual levels the boy travels through, and second, the story and themes of the game. One of the most impressive things Limbo does is communicate gameplay to the player without any sort of tutorial or text box. There is no HUD, for example, but the glowing white eyes of the boy act as the life bar. When the eyes go dark, the hero has perished. But it goes beyond this. There was a time before the internet where young gamers would often obtain games loose from used shops. With no instruction manuals or online guide, a player would just press buttons and figure it out. This is exactly how Limbo works. There is a pit of spikes. Jumping is the only logical solution. There's an impassable barrier, with a crate clearly in the foreground standing out against the background. The boy's arms move upwards towards a handle. The player can easily discern to pull on the crate, which offers the solution to pass. Pulling an object for a makeshift platform to reach higher areas has now been taught to the player without a manual or on-screen guide. The visual art style also does a masterful job, guiding a player's eyes towards hazards. There is no greater contrast than black and white, and these black traps contrast sharply against the blooming white of the forest background. Again, the designers are clearly communicating with the player in a purely visual way. But this isn't just limited to the visuals. The audio is also used to communicate with the player. When the boy jumps on this log, the player will hear a boulder rolling downwards. It should be obvious it cannot be cleared with a jump, and the sudden jolt of sound gives the player the clue to retreat as danger is coming. With fight not being an option, a player will instinctively choose flight. Sound is used in other creative ways as well. The protagonist will eventually reach this giant spider with seemingly no way to pass. By moving towards the spider, one can cause it to strike. After a few attempts, a crashing sound can be heard in the distance. Sure enough, a trap has fallen off a branch. Knowing there is no way to bypass the spider, and now understanding how to make it strike, the player will use logic and reason to learn how the trap can be used to harm the spider. Again, without Limbo telling the player any of this at all. Curiously, the boy is not alone in the world of Limbo, and the first half of the game features plenty of other people as well. While standing on a floating body with an impossible jump, a loud sound plays, again alerting the player to danger, before a zombie-looking character with a bug attached to its head walks straight into the water and drowns. This little bug then plays a crucial element in many future puzzles. As expected, eventually the boy will have one of these parasites land on his head, and like the cutscene earlier, some control is lost. Basically, upon attachment, the player will be forced to move left. One can slow this movement down, but not stop it nor change directions. However, upon reaching a ray of light, the parasite will cause the player to change directions. The only way to end this cycle before being forced into suicide is by getting close to one of these ceiling-based worms, which feed on them. This is predictably foreshadowed beforehand, but is also reinforced with a box and a pit of water, which will surely kill the boy. The clock is ticking for sure, but even with the added pressure of death, all of these elements are presented to the player to free oneself of the parasite. Now, my intent is not to spoil everything, but I can think of no other way to demonstrate the beautiful way the game communicates with the player non-verbally than give specific examples. Anyway, while the world of Limbo is believable enough, it takes a strange turn about a third of the way through. After generating some electricity, a machine causes rain. The rain is used cleverly to create a whole new slew of puzzles involving floating objects, and the player racing to complete tasks before drowning. But it also marks a turning point in the plot. Just where the hell are we, anyway? Despite feeling old, there is a modern machine causing it to rain. It almost gives the whole game a steampunk vibe. This feeling is enhanced even more with the machines to interact with. Switches will shut off electricity, buttons will cause a crane to drop a crate, elevators can be lowered and raised, levers will cause gears to start moving, magnets activate magnetic floors which trap items in place, other switches activate electric floors which will kill the player but also power other machines. Near the end of the adventure, gravity is manipulated. At first, only objects are affected by this change, but later on, the player is affected. There are machine guns waiting to mow down the player. At times, the entire world will start rotating, forcing the player to react to obstacles shifting directions. And of course, after teaching the player these individual elements, Limbo combines them to form more complex obstacles, forcing the player to think ahead and anticipate how everything on the screen will interact in new ways. Sloppy play or a lack of concentration will almost always result in a harsh punishment, but I wouldn't say the trial and error gameplay is unfair, like in other games from the genre. With almost every death, the player will learn something needed to complete the obstacle. It doesn't feel cheap, but rather with each death, the player is given a new clue or piece to the puzzle. It's absolutely brilliant, offering a sense of satisfaction with each success, rather than relief. In fact, I can honestly think of just a single puzzle which the player is not given an opportunity to complete correctly on their first try. There are 2 crushers placed sequentially in this section here. However, each reacts differently. On the first one, the player needs to jump on the center raised platform, but avoid it on the second one. I honestly have no idea how a first-time player could predict this behavior, and as far as I can tell, this is the only puzzle a player is doomed to fail. There is another area where the graphics also obscure a crucial trap. Until the player is close, the trap is obscured by the vignette and blur, but its presence is vital information, making it feel like the game was hiding it in an attempt to trick the player. But that's it. Despite numerous deaths, Limbo is almost completely void of anything I would consider cheap. In fact, there is no reason to even consult a guide for this one. Nothing is too obtuse or confusing, where a player of average skill wouldn't be able to resolve a puzzle. And if one can't figure it out, trial and error will certainly fill in the blanks, allowing for success. The only other grievance I could possibly come up with is the brief moment while cocooned. The protagonist sort of hops forward and can also jump, but with this little hop it can be difficult to get into an exact location to make a precise jump. The protagonist also takes a moment to wind up for a jump, making the input feel delayed, which can cause death. This is absolutely a nitpick though, because for the other 99% of the game, the controls are flawless. But this makes this strange moment stand out all the more. So yeah, the player gets cocooned briefly, which is pretty odd, but he also battles a giant spider and rides a fly, but this crow is normal sized. So what in the world is going on in the world of Limbo? Well, there is no official explanation. So much like 2001: A Space Odyssey, the player is free to imagine whatever they like. Initially, I didn't put much stock into the world at all, as the brilliant level and puzzle design was all I cared about. For me, it was the journey, not the destination, that grabbed me and would not let go. However, there is certainly much to ponder. The world of Limbo is filled with other characters looking to harm the boy for seemingly no reason. One could accept this as a simple video game trope or wonder why. Why would anyone want to harm an unarmed boy? Why are others trapped in crates or even hanging? When the player does get a glimpse of the sister, she appears to be leaning over something with her hands together. This evokes sadness or even death. Is the entire game a metaphor for something else? The opening areas are heavenly, while the later later stages hellish. Worst, or best of all, the game has no meaningful ending. The screen cuts abruptly to black and ends where the game began. There is no conclusion to the story. Critics of the day criticized this, and some found it to be a glaring flaw. However, I tend to find this lack of clarity to be decidedly purposeful. I personally find critics and reviewers to be overly critical on story elements when they are oftentimes the least important part of many games. And this isn't a knock at my colleagues either. People get enjoyment from different things. But to me, it seems the lack of a true narrative, despite the bizarre imagery, is deliberate and meant to make the player think about narrative in a different way. Nitpicking whether the voice acting is matching the mouth animations is sort of missing the forest for the trees. Another main complaint was the overall length in comparison to the original $15 asking price. First, I should note I am not comfortable with the reviewer deciding value for me. Instead, I feel the facts should be presented and a consumer can use this information to determine if the asking price is worth it for themselves. Second, as of 2018, physical copies of Limbo can be found for as little as $6, making this a moot point anyway. That said, my first playthrough of Limbo took around 5 hours, with my 5th playthrough taking just 59 minutes, and that 5th playthrough says a lot. On the surface, there is limited replayability outside of chasing achievements. Hidden throughout the land of Limbo are little eggs and obscure nooks and crannies of the levels, which can be tricky to find and procure. There's also an achievement for finishing the game with 5 or fewer deaths, which is ultimately what sucked me into the game. As of this video, I have failed, getting my death count down to 8, but I intend on fully completing both versions of this game I own. And this is where the genius of Limbo lies. It has that easy to learn, tough to master mechanic all of the great games do. The controls are dead simple, and beating the game requires little more than some persistence. But I want to master the game. I want to complete each and every obstacle perfectly and truly understand and comprehend what the designers and developers were thinking while creating this game. Games don't have to be long in order to provide a lot of gameplay, and a game doesn't need to spell out a narrative in order for players to get something meaningful from the tale. However, I think the credits screen sums up what makes Limbo so special. The list of gameplay testers is massive, like seriously massive, and it absolutely shows in the level design. Platforms are placed perfectly, never requiring superhuman skill to find success. I never needed to consult a guide or let's play to figure out how to overcome adversity, because Limbo does a perfect job giving the player all of the necessary information needed to move forward. Every single item in the game is expertly placed, from the littlest details to the major ones. The slope of every floor is at the perfect angle, assuring sliding crates arrive at the exact right place at the exact right moment. Buzzsaws are at the perfect height, allowing just enough room for a player to leap over. The timing of the automated anti-gravity is correct, allowing speedrunners to race through by the skin of their teeth without slowing down. Limbo manages to feature the design polish of a Mario game with the style of a Sega game. So yeah, Limbo is not only great, the game is brilliant. The controls are fluid, the level design is intricate, the atmosphere is provocative, and sound is used expertly to set the atmosphere and communicate information to the player. The game is infinitely replayable thanks to challenging achievements as well as offering a wonderful 90s dose of just one more game. And in fact, I think that's exactly what I'm going to do, and I can honestly think of no greater compliment.